I'm Amy Poehler, and this is not funny.
How could fear be a gift? Well, it is.
These feelings are gifts. They're not things we should ignore.
The gift of fear is a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD all rolled into one.
Thank you for coming here.
It's my pleasure. I love all of your books. The Gift of Fear resonated with me in such profound ways. I give it to all the women in my life, and I keep finding new things about it, and I keep having to adjust as a person growing in the world to how I relate to the world and how I feel about my safety and the safety of others. I am now the mother of 2 young sons, and there's a lot of discussion in your work speaking to women about women. And I wonder what a mother of young boys, soon to be young men, need to impart on these young people. What should I be saying to my young boys to help them understand all of this?
Well, there's a line in Gift of Fear, it's not mine, so I like quoting it, where a man says, "My father did not teach me how to live. He lived and let me watch him do it." And the same is true for mothers. How you conduct yourself, how you are with them in terms of meaning what you say and saying what you mean and requiring that you be heard and accepting nothing less than being heard, sets the stage for their relationships with women as they grow up, that they will be willing to hear what women say, willing to acknowledge it. You know, it's an extraordinary opportunity to teach just by how you live. Then there are some practical things to be taught. Certainly how to treat women is a key thing that if you look at the two sides, I would trade all the teaching I've been able to do for a high school class that would teach young women to say no and stick to it and would teach young men to hear no. Well, you have that opportunity with your sons and I have with my sons to teach them that when a woman says no, it's the end of the discussion instead of the beginning of the negotiation. Another quick thing is about safety for your kids, for the boys. You know, the primary danger to young boys is finding themselves in a place where there are guns.
Yeah.
So you might not have guns in your home, but they go and they do a play date somewhere, and it's a tough question to ask, but it's a smart question to ask the other parents, is there a gun in the house? If they are offended by the question, they're not a good play date match. And if they say, no, absolutely not, and they tell you why, better. If they say, oh, yes, there are 2 guns in the house, but we keep them safely, not good enough. Or we keep them in a secret place, not good enough, because if there's anything 8-year-old boys are good at, and 9 and 10 and 11-year-old boys, it's finding things.
Yes.
And boys are wired to love guns. That's why it's, it's one of the only consumer products that has no mainstream advertising. And they're born to be interested in it. There's no talking them out of it. But there is definitely keeping them from guns, because guns and young boys don't mix.
Yes. I love what you say in Protecting the Gift, another book that you wrote, about getting young children especially used to being able to evaluate people with you. It's a great skill and also, frankly, a really nice way to talk to and learn more about your children, because it's very difficult, as you know, to ask your kid, how was your day? What are you feeling? But when you talk about a third party, did you like that person? Was that person weird? Why did you want to talk to that person? Why did you not want to talk to the person? You learn a lot about them as well as the person. Can you speak a little bit more about, from a young age, being able to have that skill?
Well, it's a great thing you're doing, really a great thing you're doing, because you're teaching them by asking that their answers matter, that how they feel about somebody matters. And if you look at the old school message was never talk to strangers. I strongly disagree with never talk to strangers. Rather, I prefer learn how to talk to strangers, learn how to assess them. Don't assume that stranger equals some kind of risk or danger, because it doesn't. Strangeness, that's an interesting thing to be intuitive about. One of the problems with never talk to strangers is that the day your mother teaches you that or your father teaches you that, you watch them talk to strangers.
Right.
And then they even compel you to do it. Say hello to the nice person in the supermarket. Accept the sample from the person in the supermarket. Let this person kiss you. Let this person hug you. So with what you're doing with your boys and saying, how did you feel about that person? You're teaching them to register how they feel about that person. And in that is really the center of the quality of our lives is who do we choose to have relationships with and who do we choose to avoid. I'm really encouraging parents to teach their kids to make very slow decisions about whom you include in your life and very fast decisions about whom you exclude in your life.
That's great advice. And that advice lasts your entire life. You have to constantly be reevaluating, constantly kind of putting people through the sifter and figuring out who's left. So there were many reasons why I loved your book. I loved the vulnerability in the writing. I loved the detail, the sense of humanity. And also at the time, I was an improviser in Chicago. And there were so many connections I felt in terms of what I was doing at the time with my life, my career. I was on stage with people having to kind of actively listen, pay attention to the first unusual thing. And there's a lot of crossover in terms of talking about your gut feeling, what you're supposed to trust and how you trust each other. If only we listened that actively in real life, if only we were really paying attention to the first unusual thing, because it is often an indicator of many things to come.
True.
And humor is a very interesting cousin to all of this because it can mask a lot of real feeling. People joke about things they're afraid of.
Yes.
Can you talk more about that, about how humor can be a source of denial?
Sure. And this applies more to men than to women because men are less likely to say, I'm afraid. I'm concerned about going into this environment or being in this circumstance. And so in my career, if somebody ended a meeting and we said, oh, I'll see you at 3 o'clock tomorrow, and he jokes, yeah, if I'm not shot by then, I sit back down. We have more to talk about because it's not, that kind of joke does not arise from, I'd like to say something funny, let me choose from the menu of options. Rather, the thought arises, and then the ridiculousness of it is seen to be funny or is seen to be, as you said, a way to express something and do it without really owning it. And so I've really learned to listen. I'm not talking about jokes in a professional sense, but jokes between people and things that they joke about are often, as you said, things they're afraid of. And then on improv, there is a pure connection between the two things. The ability to intuitively see where someone's going, to see that first unusual thing, what I call in my work the pre-incident indicator. If it's an unusual thing that gets your attention, it gets your attention for a reason. In improv, you might then follow that lead, or you might step over it, or you might back away from it, and the same is true in real life. You'd see that indicator, it's brought its head up, and you can pay attention to it, and usually if we'll bring our attention to something, it'll stop bugging us. When we don't bring our attention to it, we often get a little bit more of a nagging feeling, and ideally, we can react way before it's fear. That's the intuitive signal that people can't ignore because it's so distressing, it feels so bad.
Let's talk about humor and what you said, which is a kind of professional jokes and the setting for them. What is your opinion about the way we should approach humor in this kind of very PC world?
Well, one of the reasons I was so glad to be meeting with you today is that comedians, and female comedians in particular, are the truth tellers in this culture. They are saying things that women don't say. They're saying them courageously, and they are able to be heard in that context. But the truth is there. I'll give you an example. Rape is never a joking matter. So that's a PC statement. I don't agree at all. We have to remember that it was a rape joke that undid Bill Cosby's ability to cover up what had gone on with so many people. And then it was a rape joke by you on the Golden Globes, you and Tina Fey, that really got the entertainment industry to stop all its denial and wake up.
Into the woods, Cinderella runs from her prince, Rapunzel is thrown from a tower for her prince, and Sleeping Beauty just thought she was getting coffee with Bill Cosby.
I don't know if you guys saw this on the news today, but Bill Cosby has finally spoken out about the allegations against him. Cosby admitted to a reporter, I put the pills in the people! The people did not want the pills in them!
No, Tina, that's not right. That's not right. It's more like, I got the pills in the bathroom, but I put them in the people!
You're right. It's
There you have two rape jokes that made a huge difference, that allowed many women to be heard who hadn't been heard, and allowed something to come to the fore. My belief is that everything can be joked about because it's a direct connection to intuition, humor. It comes up directly out of intuition, and even that which is planned and thought out and performed is an artistic creation that's the last thing we want to stifle, particularly since women in comedy are a model for other people to say things that you know are going to be unpopular. I mean, part of the very joke will sometimes be that you're taking a chance and saying something that would be outrageous in any other context. But in that context, it serves the joke. And what happens when the audience laughs? I hear something funny, and I don't think about it, and an involuntary, spontaneous reaction comes. Greatest art in the world because you see the result of it right that second. If they laugh, they laugh. And so, to me, I'm really opposed to things that limit speech and cause people to hesitate in their artistic expression because the truth is in that humor.
You know, you talk about women and their smile, coming to terms with how often they are forced or coerced to smile, and how that smile can not only betray their feelings, but be an indicator for someone that they are not really in touch with how they're feeling in the moment. You know, like this, it can be a dangerous thing in a way, this smile. And it's tied to a much bigger thing with this idea of when women are somewhat, for lack of a better term, being inappropriate, it often is tied into them telling the truth. And when women tell the truth, more women feel less alone, and, you know, all the pressures of being perfect mother, wife, girlfriend, and all that stuff doesn't exist. And we get a little bit more comfortable about not having to fake it. The idea of losing the smile, it's a very profound thing for a lot of women. I know it really resonated with me in my 45th year. It's kind of the journey of most women, is to figure out how to lose their smile, keep their smile really when they mean it, only use it when they truly want to. And it's an incredible struggle. How does that relate to the work you're doing?
Well, the automatic smile
Yeah.
is very destructive to women. If a man you don't know smiles at you and you haven't initiated some contact with him, does it ever feel good?
No.
Never. And men just don't know it. They think that's a good thing to do from across the room. But the woman is virtually obligated to smile back in this culture. And what is she if she doesn't? She's a bitch. And so what do most women do? Smile back, thinking they'll diffuse their discomfort. What is he here? An invitation to come over and talk or what have you. And in fact, the invitation to keep someone in your environment is at the beginning of almost all criminal victimization, right? You have to control above all who's in your environment. I think this is like the last great frontier for women to feel comfortable doing what I get to do, which is walk around all day and be polite, kind, generous, be impatient, agitated, annoyed, be whatever I am in the moment, and nobody's going to call out to me, why are you being such a bitch? And am I saying never smile? Not at all. I'm saying smile when it comes from your heart and when that's what you want to do, and not to feel compelled to engage with every man who wants to engage. And congratulations for being there. And no joke, it comes with a cost because somebody or many people will say, oh, I saw Amy Poehler at this thing the other day. She was a bit cold.
Yeah.
To a complete stranger who she has no reason to be warm to or engage with.
Yeah.
But that's the consequence, and well worth the benefit, because the benefit is not having people in your environment stay in your environment when you're uncomfortable about it.
It's also the gift of age. Is the older you get better at being okay with people not liking you, whatever that means to you. You know, you just get better at settling into some version of authenticity, hopefully, if you do some work. And you just care a little bit less. You let go a little bit to this idea that I have to take care of everyone and make everyone feel good. And it's absolutely every woman's struggle. It's why Gift of Fear resonates, because it's not only about in the moment prevention, but it is a bigger discussion about how we put women on pedestals, how we objectify, how we project things onto them. And this idea of getting your own power, getting in touch with your own intuition is a lifelong journey that every woman I know is on. And, you know, I wrote a book called Yes, Please.
I love the book, Yes, Please.
Thank you.
You know I wrote to you that it's a companion piece for Gift of Fear.
Thank you.
As far as I'm concerned, and much funnier.
We got to go on the road. There was a story in my book that was what one would almost consider a benign example. I came into an environment with a producer for a show, and very slowly, at my age, and what I felt was a very powerful position, started to become manipulated. And it was happening in real time. And unlike maybe in my 20s, where I would have subsumed a lot of these feelings and assumed it was my fault and my problem, I was trying to adjust the entire time and realized it was, wow, I found myself in the middle of a negotiation after I've said no. And this producer who disappointed me in his performance and who apologized without apologizing and who kept asking things of me that I had said many times I didn't want to do, ended this meeting by standing up and saying, "Can I have a hug?" And I remember it being very out of body that I walked towards him and gave him a hug. And I almost was laughing, thinking, wow, you still have so much work to do. Wow, one must constantly be vigilant about their own boundaries. It's like a fence that keeps moving. And
you also wrote that you thought you would tell your friends the story would be, and I didn't hug him, but you actually did.
Yeah, I think what I did is I lied in the beginning and I told everyone that I didn't hug him because my friends would have said,
right.
You?
Right.
And then I kind of came clean because it was the truth. And it was also much more interesting to discuss with my friends. I felt very in control and this was still happening. And so when you're with women who are not in positions of power and you think about how they can be exploited, it's such an indication of how one must be vigilant. And, you know, people overuse this term all the time, boundaries. Like, what are your boundaries? But I think boundaries are a learned behavior. They must be practiced. It's what you discussed about getting our children used to how we talk to people. I, as an adult woman, have had to practice ways of saying no, being firm, saying what I want and finishing the sentence, not apologizing for my feelings. And it's easier sometimes to practice them on things that are lower stakes. So, for example, a guy is painting my apartment and I'm really annoyed about something he's doing, but I think to myself, oh, he's painting my apartment and he's, you know, and I'm paying him and this is like an awkward status thing and I don't want to be that kind of person, but I just don't like his vibe. I don't like how he's talking or whatever. It's interesting when you get to the point where you can say, hey, just to let you know, I don't like how you're behaving, finish the job, and then I think we'll be done. It's very, very, it's like a lifelong lesson to do that for most women. Anyway, my point being that the simple act of letting go of pleasing others is so embedded in this. There's no blame or shame in that. It's just about, can you keep doing work to make sure that you can speak and be an advocate for yourself?
This idea of direct authenticity in the moment without running it through the editor and judge in your head is great, because the judge in your head is a cultural judge, right? So parents, teachers, modeling of people in movies and stories, you know, Beauty and the Beast, it's all supposed to be a certain way. And my belief is that intuition, gut feeling, knows all of it automatically. Knows, boom, this word could come out right now, but I'm holding on to it. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to think about it for 10 minutes. And then it's going to be more awkward when I do it because I'm going to telegraph that I'm kind of apologetic about it. There's an actual new science, last couple of years, that there's 100 million neurons in your stomach lining. It is called the little brain. And it receives all kinds of information, and they're constantly, this brain and that brain are constantly in contact. And it's the one that really has the best information, intuition.
Wow. You talk about charm, which is a commodity, currency in my business, and how charming people are in the middle of an action.
Yes, I really encourage people to think of charm as a verb, to charm someone. So if somebody tells me, oh, he was really charming, I say, you mean he was really charming you? Because it's not a feature of a human being. It's not a condition of a human being. It is a choice to apply. And obviously the most charming person either of us has ever met isn't
George Clooney.
Oh,
No,
George
sorry.
Clooney,
I
very
thought you
good.
were asking me. I thought this was a quiz.
He can be, and I can be too, and everybody can be. And that most charming person, when they don't turn it on, they don't turn it on. So it is one of the strategies of communication that people use, and the question when somebody charms you is, why? Why are they doing it? And you might say, because he likes me. He's doing it because he is showing respect. He's doing it because he's meaning to be kind, whatever it may be. But if he's doing it because he wants to stay in my environment or get me to go into some environment with him, then charm is my enemy.
You talk about the difference between sustained fear and real fear, and you very simply explain that the difference is that you sense something rather than you're remembering something, right? Your fear is based on something that you can feel, hear, smell, taste, or touch. And we live in such a world now where we are barraged with news and information and things that we are supposed to be afraid of. How do we turn down the noise of that so we actually can see real fear when it's in front of us and feel it?
Well, two things. I start with the harder one for people to do, it seems. To remember that the news business is a business, and its preferred state for the audience is a condition of fear. That's what brings you to it. That's the loss leader in that market. It's clearly not good for you. What other species on Earth, if Martians landed, we say, what do you guys do? Oh, I get up in the morning and I turn on grisly pictures, and then at dinner time we have that on in the background, and then right before I go to bed I like to get a half hour more of the grisly pictures and the police officers saying, oh, it was a gruesome crime scene, the worst I've ever seen in my career. That's what the country's doing. Any surprise, we'd be afraid. So that's number one, is don't watch the news. And recognize that today, more than ever, we can choose to get our information the way we want to get it. Reading it, for example. The second one is to receive information critically. I mean, I've asked people my whole life, did you ever see anything on the television news that helped you avoid danger? Did you ever see anything on the television news that just you got in the nick of time and you were able to save yourself from that next, whatever it is, the next trendy crime? And I've never met anybody who said, thank God I watched the news last night. That was the big difference. And that's all I do, is interview people who've experienced violence.
Yeah.
So the real issues are what's going on in your environment. You talked about the two kinds of fear. So fear is a signal in the presence of danger. All the other fears, anxiety, worry, dread, they're all about things you imagine. You either imagine them or you remember them. And listening to somebody's idea, programmed fears, for a business, a big business in this country, it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make anybody's life better.
So we have people in power, leaders, who base their careers on those fears. And there is this sense right now of believing people, right? So there's an entire discussion, I think more than ever, and certainly in the past 20 years, of women coming forward in brave ways to talk about sexual assault. And there's a big discussion about believing them. Is it real? Did it happen? Is it true? Is it false? And all that stuff. And that becomes really the biggest part of the discussion. What falls away is this bigger sense of shame attached to those things, the reluctance to report those things, and leaders who, either personally or professionally would like those things to go away. How do we handle that when our culture, our national culture is afraid to talk about what they're afraid of?
Well, it is a very serious problem right now, perhaps more than ever, that we have political leaders, and we could obviously name one or two that come to mind, but they're always there. There's always somebody there. And other kinds of leaders who get away, for example, with abusive conduct toward women, who are voted for nonetheless or encouraged nonetheless. And that message to women is not a good, and particularly to young women, is not a good message, because it says that's okay. Here's somebody, for example, you wouldn't tolerate the behavior in a friend, but you'll tolerate it in a politician. In terms of the question of whether women are telling the truth when they make reports, that is probably the single largest disincentive to coming forward with something, is that you will have to persuade others that you are not a gold digger, not a
Right.
liar, not crazy, a wide variety of things. And really the only answer I have to this, and it may not be entirely satisfying, is no matter what, in all those circumstances, it simply takes courage. You know, we don't look at the ocean and say, let's change the ocean because it's sometimes dangerous. It is the ocean. What we do is we learn how to swim, and we teach our kids how to swim. And we know when we can handle it and when we can't. And we get out of the water when it's too dangerous. That's the same with human behavior. There's no changing men. Forget about changing men.
Interesting. Really?
Really. I think there's no, you can have, I'll give you an example. A politician last year talking about, his intention to end rape in this country.
Yeah.
Really? And then how about war? Let's end that, and let's end rudeness. How about just, human nature? The reality is that abuse of women and also violent interaction between men has gone on throughout mankind's existence on Earth, and it is not going to stop. And the problem with saying we've just passed a new law, do you really think there's a rapist somewhere who decides not to rape because of a law or because of a public discussion? Now, what you may get is young men learning to behave better by some of the teaching that we can give them. But let's be very clear that rape itself is a behavior. There is no rapist. It is not a person who walks around all day raping everybody he sees. It's a behavior, and all variety of people get involved in that. I think socially, here's what's happened.
Yeah.
That is an improvement. Men exercise power through prestige, through position, through dominance, and women exercise power through communication. So the very things you're talking about getting that voice and using that voice, that's where female power comes from. And this message is not discouraging. It's encouraging because it is saying no government's going to help you, no police department's going to help you, no corporation's going to help you. You're going to be alone in that environment, in that circumstance, and you have everything you need.
Okay, yes, because ultimately it is about personal responsibility and being an advocate for yourself. However, could you also say, though, that men and women can also look out for each other?
Hugely.
And there has been a great amount of education, especially with young men, to start paying attention in ways for women that they never have before.
Absolutely huge improvement. And I want to say, we are advancing enormously. Things that weren't crimes 50 years ago are now crimes. Stalking, for example.
Yeah.
And we have many more prosecutions. And women have access to power in America in ways that has really not existed in the vast majority of countries on Earth. So my message is not entirely discouraging. But all that stuff, the crime rate, for example. Oh, the crime rate went down. You going to feel any different tomorrow night looking for your car late at night after a screening somewhere or going to dinner because the crime rate went down and you're facing two people on the sidewalk that give you the chills? No. So I don't want to teach anybody that the crime rate went down. This is a human condition that women in particular have to be conscious of, aware of, intuitive about, and then respond to their feelings about safety. And all that other stuff, all of it, statistics are politics.
I agree. One of the big differences between now and when you wrote the book is the use of electronic devices, cell phones. Does our dependence on them get in the way of using our senses?
It really does. If you think about it, every predator in nature would love for its target to be distracted. And human beings now are choosing to distract themselves. I was on a subway platform in New York, and every woman I saw was doing that. There was nobody not doing that in some way, looking down, giving their entire attention to something that takes them out of the present moment, which is where life happens, and out of the present environment. And so it is a real challenge for people now to stop doing that, I know. But to recognize the difference between an environment in which this is perfectly fine, maybe sitting in a coffee shop with other people, that's perfectly great, but alone in a circumstance, that is not a time to be down here like this and not aware of your environment. That's one big change. And the other change people ask me about is the internet, wondering has that substantially changed things in terms of violence? And my answer is somewhat surprising, no. It hasn't. The internet is simply the method whereby somebody might seduce or persuade or try to get you to show up somewhere, but it's only when you show up somewhere and you're in someone's environment that danger happens. Danger never happens on the laptop or or the cell phone on its own. It's always an introduction to somebody that lures you into an environment that matters. So the internet's not really much different than the telephone. For harassing people, it's much different. And that's not really something I focus on a lot because I'm really talking about safety.
I wonder if it's harder these days for people to, as you advocate for in the book, kind of turn around and look at people when they're bothering them. You know, you very simply say when you feel like you're being followed, you need to turn around and say, I see you.
Yes.
I wonder if it's almost harder these days because that eye contact is so rare. And eye contact, as we know, is a sign of aggression or a sign of intimacy, or that it can represent many things. But we're really losing basic eye contact with each other.
It is really true that young people in particular are not learning to look at other people, period.
Yeah.
And even in the faux intimacy of these devices, the camera's here and the thing you're looking at is here, and even it doesn't make eye contact. Your observation, though, is really relevant to if someone is being followed or somebody's standing too close to you, the right thing to do is to turn around and look straight at them. And you don't say anything, but this communicates, as an animal does in nature, communicates to a predator, I do see you're there. And that's really very, very significant and important in terms of reducing victimization. But young people aren't used to looking at anybody now, and so it's a harder thing to teach. I think we can do it, and your asking and my answering hopefully reaches some people to know that get your head and look up at your life.
Well, I'd love to, start like a eye contact tour or something where we just go around and get people to stare at each other.
I think there's a lot of money in this, or absolutely no money. It's one of those two.
It's one of those kind of ideas. Yeah. So I'm a small woman, I'm 5'2", and you speak a little bit about size and how that relates to our capabilities and vulnerabilities. What do we have to come to terms with when we recognize our real estate compared to the rest of the world?
Well, it goes for men too, big men and small men. And the highest ground you can get to is reality. And that's the only place from where you can see something coming. So you always want to acknowledge whatever the circumstance is. There are heavyweight boxers and lightweights, and they don't fight each other. Knowing realistically, if you're 5'2" and weigh 80 pounds, or if you're 5'9" and weigh 150 pounds, is a different circumstance. Now, I happen to believe in self-defense training for all women and for all kids as well. And I like the training that uses padded assailants and gives a real experience of violence and a real experience of using force, because of course you have it, you have those abilities. But to know that your greatest assets will be early recognition, your greatest assets will be effective communication, and will not be in a fight. That won't be your greatest asset. And I want to say also that when it comes to drinking, I have no endorsement for drunk, by the way. I really proselytize on this one because it gets a pushback. Well, I shouldn't have to care about whether I drink, young college girl will say. It's work on him. Nature's made this decision already, right? Which is that the men are more predatory and the women are more frequently victims, period. Fact of life. So we can work on him. It may not be fair, it may not be right, but if you get drunk, what are you disabling? Your ability to intuit effectively, your ability to hear well, your ability to react well, your ability to leave often. I've got 2 daughters, and both of them have had challenges around being with men when they were drunk. And it did them no good.
And they shared that with you?
Oh yes, both did, yeah.
Wow, that must be really interesting to have Gavin de Becker be your dad.
Well, I have 8 adopted kids, 10 kids altogether, 8 sons and 2 daughters. And I taught my daughters, and it's good and bad, use your voice and be free about using it. I say it's good and bad because sometimes if they don't use it well and don't use it wisely, it can escalate a situation. But all the boys learn to listen to those girls. So the idea that both of my daughters ended up in situations where they were victimized in their teens, and in both circumstances because they were drunk, and in both circumstances because the boys were drunk.
Well, there's a connection there because they also knew they could come to you without shame if they didn't do everything right. And there's a big fear for women, intelligent, bold, smart women, when something happens to them that wasn't a random attack at the ATM, it suddenly becomes a lot more complicated. And it's very, very hard for women to come to terms with how they participated or at the very least observed things happening without trying to stop them. And it's why women don't talk about these things. It's why they don't talk about it with each other. And it's why they are re-victimized because of the shame of that. And what I love about the gift of fear and the work that you do is that there is no element of blame or shame. There is very simple, solid facts and anecdotes and strategies. But frankly, it's almost, and I mean this in a good way, there's like this mentality of like, well, on to the next. I mean, because what's the next thing that's going to happen for you? What are you going to do next time? It's not in any way minimizing real pain and suffering, but staying in that place of pain and suffering and blame and shame is really what gets people in bad places again.
Yes, and it's true, and there are serial victims. And, a very, very common response to people who've been victimized. Let's say a young woman is raped, or a date rape, which is a more complicated thing to experience because you have a feeling of more responsibility and participation, as you said, as opposed to a stranger rape. And a lot of people hear her story and say, well, you should have. And cops do it all the time. You should have this, you shouldn't have that. I never do that. I never say anything like that because the reality is they've prevailed. They're here. Clearly could have been much worse than it was. They might not be here. And whatever they did got them through this circumstance. And to find the shred of response that served them well and got them through. And remember, there is survival and prevailing at the scene of victimization, and then there's survival and prevailing afterwards, which is healing. And to help people get there, it requires that I never judge or evaluate their past circumstance. In fact, it's not even valuable because it's come and gone. The question is next time. What's going to happen next time? And because will there be a next time? Oh, so many. I don't mean you'll all be victimized over and over again, but every woman will be targeted at many, many, many times in her life. The takeaway from victimization must never be, I am a victim. The takeaway must be, I learned a new distinction.
And what your book does so well is it does not inoculate you from the inevitable. It's just a very realistic manual that speaks to the present moment, but I think very deeply to what it is like to be a woman. I mean, you really, really capture that feeling of the small negotiations, the small judgments, the constant titrating we do all day long as women.
And the constant negotiation that men are doing to get you to do something, whatever it may be.
100%. And again, it applies not only to making sure that we're not violated, but also to make sure that we're not being violent to ourselves and what we expect of ourselves. For example, what it teaches you is go into a room, ask for what you want, expect to get it, and stop talking. Those kind of things help you realize your true potential. And our true potential is what we should be aspiring to. And when we get in the way of our own potential, we're kind of being violent to ourselves.
It's true.
And so there is this level of really kind of primary basic self-care that permeates through the book and is why I think, like an onion, every year I find something different in it. And I'm just so pleased that I got a chance to talk to you about it.
I'm glad. Thank you. And there's a thing in your book about the power of silence. And women really don't do silence very often, which is you say your thing and you leave it to the other person to make their move. This idea of just being done and being silent for a moment, it's hugely powerful and it changes everything.
Yeah.
Amy, it means so much to me that you put your time into this and came to do this. I love that you love the book. That's obvious and good for my ego and blah, blah, blah. But that you wrote a book that is also a profound teacher and more accessible to many people, and that then you came here to talk to me about this is great. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's truly been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.